get settled and ready to go. All right. Welcome, everybody. How's it going? Awesome. I'm so glad that we have some friends joining us today. Welcome to How to Talk to Kids. And in this video, we're just going to be chatting about what we can be saying to our kids when the news gets scary. I know this past year has been just plagued with, no pun intended there on that one, plagued by pandemics and race riots. There's been a Capitol raid. Our president has been impeached twice. I live in Nashville, and so we were still like recovering from a huge tornado when a bomb went off on Christmas morning. There's just been a lot of things going on, especially in 2020 and at the beginning of 2021. And I feel like it's safe to say that we've all just been put through the ringer through the past year. And I've been noticing our kids have really been put through the ringer as well. And I personally don't feel like we're really giving enough voice to that and attention to that. And so I just kind of wanted to get on here today and draw attention to that a little bit and draw attention to some of the things that we can be doing to help them out a little bit with that. They are enduring just as much stuff as we are during this time, and that can be just as overwhelming for them, if not more overwhelming for them. And, just they're so much smaller than we are. And because of that, they don't really have the same reasoning skills or coping skills that we do. And, it just kinda seemed like when the raid on the Capitol hit over the past couple of days, or last week, it was kind of like parents just snapped. It was like, "We've had enough of all of this." It was like we were finally done pretending like everything was okay, and a lot of us felt compelled to start having a conversation with our kids about kinda how we got here, and we felt like that was something that we were really supposed to do, but then we sat down with our kids to get started, and none of us really felt like we knew what we were doing. None of us really felt like we knew what to say or what to do about it. And so I just kind of wanted to pop on here today and talk a little bit about how we can start having some of those more difficult conversations with our kids so that they get all of the information that they need, but they don't feel so incredibly overwhelmed and scared by the information that we have for them. But before I do that, I do just want us to keep a couple of things in mind. And the first one is that kids have insanely wild imaginations. Okay. Their brains can really, really run with what they see. um, and it's not uncommon at all for kids to blow things completely out of proportion, okay? Or to get some fantastical, unrealistic idea about what's going on. I was actually listening to a podcast the other day by the creators of Sesame Street, where one of the women said she was around when she was a kid. She was about 5 years old when the whole guerrilla warfare thing was coming to into the light and into the news. And whenever she would hear the term guerrilla warfare at 5 years old, like she thought that meant gorillas, like gorillas were gonna come like sweep through her city and like snatch her up in bed. And that's obviously like terrifying for a 5 year old to think. And so it's really important that we as parents keep that in mind, that they have a huge imagination. And also they take things so literally. They're so little and they take things so literally that sometimes we might think they're on the same page with us and we might think they understand, but they totally don't. Okay. They really have the capacity to make something up that is completely wild and inaccurate and then hold it in their head as truth. So, the first thing I want you to do is to keep in mind that they have that in them And it's our job to make sure that we are clarifying everything for them so that they don't get scared about something that they don't really need to be scared about. Okay. The next thing I want us to keep in mind is that we can't always control the content of what our kids are seeing, but we can control their exposure. Okay. And what I mean by that is we don't want to shield them from what's going on in the world because they absolutely have a right to know what's going on in the world that they live in. But also, we want to make sure that we are monitoring the content that they're watching that wasn't really made for them. Okay. We have like I don't know about you. I actually grew up in my grandparents' house a lot. I was over there all the time, and my granddad constantly watched Fox News. Okay. And he had it on all the time. It was on constantly. And in his defense, he thought, oh, she's so little and, she's not really paying attention to it. She's playing with her toys anyway. She's not really paying attention to what's going on the news. But that really wasn't true. I was sinking in and getting a lot of information that really wasn't suited for me at that age, just because it was constantly on. And so we want to be really mindful that we don't constantly have those news sources coming into our kids all the time. Again, we want them to be informed, but we don't want them to be so overwhelmed about what's going on that they just kind of check out and become scared about something that they don't really need to be scared about. Now, I do want to say really quickly before we move on, though, if you are a younger parent that doesn't wake up to Good Morning America and you don't have the news on all the time, I don't want you to think that this one doesn't apply to you because I can guarantee you, you probably have some news notifications set up on your phone. And I would also be willing to bet that your kid plays like videos on your phone or they play like Candy Crush or something like that on your phone as well. And if those notifications are constantly coming through, then they are still getting that same exposure, even if they're not watching it on a television. So I want you to be mindful of that as well. And the last thing I'm going to say before we get into kind of the nitty gritty of how these conversations need to be flowing is that more than anything else, you guys, it is our job to create a space where kids feel safe and comfortable coming to us with their thoughts and their opinions and their questions. Okay. We might think that we can control and their exposure to the point where they're not seeing anything that we don't want them to see, but I'm going to be honest, that's just really not true. They are going to hear stuff. Okay. They're going to hear it on the internet. They're going to hear it from kids at school. They're going to go over to somebody's house to play, and somebody else might have the TV on. You just don't know. And they are going to hear this information. And what you don't want them to do is think that they have to process that on their own. Okay. We have to make sure that we are not judging them for what they think, that we're not laughing at them for all of their preconceived notions. We want to make sure that we are just really open, that we are ready to listen to them, and we're ready to have these conversations with them so that they don't feel like they have to go through all of that alone. But that's easier said than done, right? Like, definitely so. So, let's talk about some of the ways that we can make that happen. Okay. I am going to walk you through exactly how I would have this conversation with a kid, whether it's about a pandemic or it's about a capital raid or it's about something that's going to happen in the future. You can kind of apply this structure to anything. Now, I'm not saying you have to stick to this, you know, exactly. It doesn't have to be exactly what I say and exactly the order that I tell you to do it. I just want to make sure that you have the full toolkit so that you have the ability to skip over a step if you think your kid doesn't need it. But I want to make sure you have all of the steps just in case your kid does. Okay, so here's how I would have this conversation with a kid that is really, really tricky. Okay, it has about 8 steps in it, and I'm going to tell it to you in order of how I would say it. But again, you can skip over one of these steps if you feel like your kids already got it again, we don't want them to feel like we're wasting their time, and we don't wanna waste time either, so, I just want you to make sure that you have all of the steps in case they do need all of them, okay? The first one is to bring it up. Obviously, you can't start a conversation if they don't know what you're talking about, right? And sometimes this is really easy because your kid will bring up the conversation for you. They might say, "Hey, I heard about this at school today," or "Hey, somebody told me this on the playground, and what do you know about that, mommy?" They might bring up the conversation as well, and then you are stuck with having the rest of it, whether you're ready for it or not. Or sometimes it's on you. Sometimes you need to sit down and you need to say, "Hey, some stuff has been happening in the world, and I just kind of wondered what you've heard about it, or what you think about it." And you kind of just want to open that conversation up like it's a normal conversation about what they played yesterday or what they're going to have for dinner tonight. Okay. You don't want to say, like, "Hey, I've got something really serious and scary and important to talk to you about." Like, you just want to open it up like it's totally normal. Like, "Hey, kiddo, there's been some stuff going on in the world lately, and I've just wondered if you've heard anything about it." Okay. And then from there, after the doorway is open, you just want to ask them what they already know. Okay. And this is really important to do before you start telling them what's going on. You want to ask them what they already know about it so that you give them a space to kind of reflect and ask some questions. And it also gives you a moment to hear and to think about what they already think is true so that you know how to respond to that well. Okay, let's go back to our girl who was 5 years old and she heard the term guerrilla warfare. If that parent didn't know that she thought that meant like gorillas were going to bust out of a cage and come snatch her up in the middle of the night, then obviously, like, that parent would have had a completely wrong conversation with that little girl. Okay, so you want to know kind of what they already think and what they already think they know about the topic before you start really unpacking so that you can be really clear about your points, and you can also clarify anything that they think is true that might not really be true. Okay, so it kind of just gives you a chance to eliminate any of those wild misconceptions like gorillas coming for guerrilla warfare. Okay. And then after you already know what they know, it is time to start giving them some information. Okay. And when you give them some information and you tell them what's going on, you have to tell them the truth. Okay. It's really important that we give them our facts, that we give them the things that are real and true. We don't want to color it all the time with our opinions. We want to tell them what happened and what's going on, and we also want to give them a little bit of context, okay? So we don't want to lie to them because, guys, you would be really amazed at how much kids can actually handle, okay? You really don't need to dumb down the information for them like a lot of us feel the need to. Just make sure that you're limiting what you say to the information that they really need to know, okay? They don't need to know that people raided the Capitol and some people were going to take hostages. They don't need to know that people were shot and killed. They don't need to know that somebody had a bomb inside of it and that was going to blow up the entire Capitol building. They don't need to know that kind of stuff. They just need to know that some people were really upset and really frustrated and they thought they were doing the right thing by speaking out, but they made some people really scared, and that people raided the Capitol building. Okay. The other thing that's really important, I mean, I'm going to go back to this piece on context for just a second. Um, it's really important that you don't, how do I even want to word this? It's really important that you don't make them more scared than they need to be by being truthful about it. Okay. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. So if I'm having a conversation with my kids about the raid on the Capitol building, I'm going to tell them, "Hey, this thing really happened and it was really scary. And if I lived there, I would be super scared. And it's really unfortunate that that happened. But guess what? We don't live there." And I might even like pull out a map to give them context and say, like, "Hey, here's where that happened and here's where you are. And there are miles and miles and miles between us. Okay, so even though that might happen again, even though those people maybe aren't all arrested yet, if something like that happens again, they're gonna go back to that place. They're not going to come here. They're not going to come to our house. They're not going to get you. Okay. And that kind of stuff is the stuff that you need to let them know while you are giving them the information that can be scary, because that's going to really solidify it for them and it's going to comfort them as well. Um, but here comes the hardest part. After you have told them what happened, I can guarantee you the next thing out of a child's mouth is going to be why? Why did this happen? Why did those people do those things? Why did they go in and raid the Capitol? And that's just really hard to hear. That's like a kid asking why the sky is blue. That's just such a complex answer that they are not going to be able to grasp. And so, again, I really, really encourage you when they ask you why, please, please, please don't settle for easy answers. You don't need to dumb the information down for them. I hear a lot of adults tell kids things like, hey, there are just some really bad and really evil people in this world. And they kind of play off of that like superhero fairy tale thing, where there is clear cut good and clear cut evil. And I totally get why we do this because I used to do that also. We do it because we think that it won't be accessible to them if we don't phrase it in a way that like comes from their storybooks. But I really want us to try to navigate away from doing that because one, that's not the only way that your kids are going to be able to understand it. And two, that's not really the way that things work in the real world, and we're kind of doing them a disservice by playing into that naivety, okay? I feel like most of us really do feel like no one is 100% good and 100% evil, or very few people are. Most of the time, guys, it's not all black and white. The truth is, most of us are somewhere in those million shades of gray in the middle, okay? Most of us have made some really good decisions and we've made some really bad decisions. Some of us have a lot of goodness in us and we also have a lot of badness in us. Some of us just have more good than others. Some of us have more bad than others. Some of us, it kind of just depends on the day. We're all human. None of us are perfect. And so it's really important that we're not labeling people as good people and bad people around our kids. That doesn't really teach them to be very understanding of other people. It doesn't really teach them to be empathetic of other people. And whether we mean to or not, it kind of opens the door and tells them that it's okay for us to judge people. It's okay for us to say that person's just a bad person. We just don't want to associate with them. And obviously, that's not what we are intending to do, but that's kind of how it gets internalized to kids. So we want to be really careful about that. We want to make sure that we just tell them the truth, and you'd be surprised about what they can handle. Tell them, like I just told you, kiddo, sometimes people get really passionate about something, or they get really upset about something, or they get really angry about something, and that passion and that anger pushes them to make some really bad decisions. Um, you might even pause and take a moment to explain to them, especially if your kids are a little bit older, that shades of gray does exist, that not everybody is 100% good and not everybody is 100% evil. And then take a moment to ask them what they think. Ask them, what bad decisions did you see people making on that newscast? And then encourage them to wonder why those people made those bad decisions. What were those people thinking and why did they do that? And did their reason make it okay for them to do that? And I think that's a really important thing to elaborate on if you have the chance to. All of us have a reason for the things that we do, even our really terrible decisions. Actually, especially our really terrible decisions, right? Like, we always think we're doing the right thing. I don't know a single person who wakes up and says, wow, I think I'm really, thinking about making some terrible decisions today. Like, that's not how most people are. So we don't want that for them, right? Um, we need them to understand, Like, just because you have a reason for doing something, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right thing to do. And this is a really good opportunity to teach them something like that. Um, but also, I want to draw attention to the fact that I know some of you think I'm missing it. When your kids ask, why did this thing happen? Guys, it's 100% okay to say, "I don't know," okay? I think sometimes there's this weird disconnect that comes with being a parent or a teacher or somebody who works with kids where we know we aren't perfect, but we try to be perfect anyway. Like, we know we don't know everything because we know we feel, like, pretty freaking clueless all the time, but we still feel this need to present ourselves like we have it all together, especially around our kids, right? We feel the need to be this rock for them, and we feel the need to always have a teachable moment or always have a piece of sage advice ready to go. And honestly, guys, we've got to let that go. Okay, all of us. You need to take a breath and say, it's okay that I don't have it all together, and it's okay that I'm not perfect, and it's okay that I don't have all the answers. It's okay if my kids see me fail and backpedal a time or two. That's actually a really good thing for kids to see and hear. Okay. If you say, I don't know why that happened, that tells them it's okay if they don't understand why that happened right now. Okay. So it's completely acceptable to say, honey, I don't know why this happened, or I don't know why people did this, or I don't know why God let this happen. That's always a really, really hard one, if you're in a Christian home and if your faith is similar to mine. And so, guys, I know you might think that saying "I don't know" is causing more harm than it is good, but I promise you guys it's not. Okay? It's actually a great opportunity to encourage your kids to use some of those critical thinking skills and say, "I don't know why people did this. Why do you think they might have made those choices?" Or you could go the other direction and draw attention to one of my most favorite tools in the whole wide world called the circle of control. And if you're not familiar with this, it helps me immensely and it's great for kids with anxiety. The whole idea of the circle of control is that you have a little circle and you have a big circle. And everything in the little circle is something that is in your control. It's something that you can change, it's something that you can influence, it's something that you can do something about. And then there are things that are in that bigger circle that are outside of your circle of control. These are the things that you can't fix. These are the things that you can't change. These are the things that you have to learn to accept because there is no influencing them by yourself. Okay. And this is great for kids with anxiety. Um, and it helps you to be able to say, I don't know why terrible things like this happen, but you know what we can do? We can focus on the things that we can understand, and we can focus on the things that we can do about it, and we can focus on the things that we can learn from it. Okay? And you can leave it there. You can say, I don't know, but what can we take away from this and start going from that direction? Okay? Now, before you navigate away from this conversation completely, you don't just want to leave them with the information and then say, I don't know why it happened, right? You're probably going to have to comfort them a little bit because anything that they can't understand will either make them anxious or it will make them overwhelmed or it might even make them upset. Okay, so we need to take a moment to make sure that they are a little bit comforted and that they know they aren't in any immediate danger. Okay, I think sometimes some of us fall into the trap of thinking that kids don't really worry about anything because they're so little. Like they don't understand bills and mortgage and responsibility and all that stuff. So sometimes we kind of fall into this trap of thinking that they don't even know what anxiety is. And what we forget is that these are the same little people who are scared of the dark. These are the kids who think they can run away from thunder, and guys, these kids get spooked by like the tiniest little things, okay? I'm just gonna give you an example. When I was in kindergarten, I had a fear of the fire alarm that was so strong, guys, I would not even pee at school because I thought the bathroom door would lock and I would burn alive. Okay? So that is 100% true. So now not only do you know, like, my anxiety has been around forever, but kids do have anxiety. They do worry about things. Um, and they might be really scared about everything that you just told them and everything that you unpacked together. And so, one of my favorite ways to comfort children, especially when things like this get really big and scary on the news, is actually a piece of advice that one of my biggest role models, Mr. Rogers, says that his mom used to tell him. His mom used to sit him down and say, when things get big and things get scary, always look for the helpers. Even when things seem scary and out of control, you will always find people who are helping. And that is such a powerful image, okay? Because we've already given a voice to those people who made the bad and scary decisions. But guys, it's just as important, arguably even more important, to draw attention to all of the people who are making the right choices. All of the people that are helping to right the wrong that has been committed, even when they're scared, even when they're afraid, even when they might be in danger a little bit. It's really important to point to those people like the police officers in a raid, like food banks who are helping in the middle of a pandemic for people who lost their job. There are so many things that you can point to that show kids that people are helping and people are really doing the right thing and that the world is not 100% dark and scary. You just have to be looking for them. And so pointing those things out to kids is a great source of comfort that they can really latch on to even the next time they see something scary. Okay? Now, after that conversation happens and you have comforted them and everything, you do want to give them a moment to kind of process it in their own way, okay? And I say that because kids are ridiculously diverse, okay? Some kids will be totally okay with this conversation. They'll understand it enough and they'll be like, okay, mommy, and they'll go on about their day. They might think about it a little bit later. But other kids are going to really like stew and unpack all of this. But either way, whatever kind of kid you have, I promise you they're processing it and they're thinking about it. So you want to let them process that however they feel like they need to. Okay. Some kids will want to process it with you or with another adult. And that's great because you can talk about it with them every step of the way. But other kids will want to process it on their own and come back to talk a little bit later. And that's okay too, guys. Some kids talk, some kids journal, some kids color, some kids even act things out. That's a great way to process things for little kids. And so play is this extremely powerful mode of expression. And so you can be paying attention to the things that your kids are playing that might give you some insight as to kind of what's going on in their brain. I will never, ever, ever forget the day that I was actually having a parent teacher conference with a family one time. And I had just taught about 9/11 the day before. And while the mom and I were talking, this little boy built like a whole tower of Legos on the table and flew a plane right into it. And to make matters even trickier, this family happened to be Muslim, and I am like the whitest American that ever did live. And this mom was mortified, guys. She was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." And she was scolding the little boy who had no idea what he had done wrong. And I was just trying to stop it all, like, "No, no, no, it's okay. It's okay. I understand." Because this boy obviously wasn't being malicious, right? Like, this 5-year-old was not receiving messages from somebody who was going to do something terrible. He was not planning on flying a plane into a building. He was just processing what he had learned the day before, what we had talked about. So, all that to say, try not to be too alarmed with the way that kids choose to process things. That doesn't mean that they've grasped the wrong lesson. It doesn't mean that they are suddenly turning evil because you alerted them to this big scary thing that happened. Um, and please don't butt in and try to stop it. It's really, really important that they feel that, or excuse me, that they do what they feel they need to process that and unpack that. And then you can revisit that a little bit later after their play has stopped. You don't want to interrupt their thought process while they're playing. You want them to finish and you want their thought process to resolve. And then you can step back in and say, hey, tell me about what you were playing earlier. I'd really like to hear more about that. And that's how you can open that conversation back up. All right. And before we end today, guys, there's one more thing that I want us to make sure that we don't skip over. Um, if you're new around here, I basically have one soapbox, and I always say it always starts with us. And what I mean when I say that is, guys, it is really hard for kids to learn something that they haven't seen. If you tell a kid not to yell when they're angry, but you yell when you're angry, then you haven't really given them any tools of what they should be doing when they're angry instead. They don't have any other tools in their arsenal because you haven't showed them any other way to do it. And that same concept applies with this. Just telling your kids that they're safe and that everything is going to be okay really isn't going to cut it. We have to make it very concrete for them. And so it's actually not enough to tell them to look for the helpers. We want to take a moment and actually get ourselves involved. We want to get them involved in helping. And yes, we can have a conversation about how some of the other people have helped in that situation. We can share some of the things that other people have done to help out. But it's also important that we take a moment to share anything that we have been doing to help or anything that our kids might be able to step in and do to help, right? One of the most important things that we can instill in our kids when we have to have these really, really hard conversations is that there's always at least a little bit of good in everything. Okay. And sometimes that goodness has to come from within us. And so we have to make sure that we choose that goodness every single time, even when it's hard, even when we're scared, because that goodness is the only thing that helps people persevere when things get this dark and when things get this scary. And so helping them step into that role of action and finding things that they can do to help, finding things that they can do to influence other people, giving light to some of the things that you have been doing to help can really, really help solidify that message. And no one likes when things get dark and scary. No one likes having to have these hard conversations with their kids. But there are so many ways that you can use this hard conversation to teach them so many great things about just being a good human being. And so we really want to make sure that while we're having these conversations, um, we aren't getting too anxious ourselves. Kids can pick up kind of on our anxiety. We kind of want to have a direction. So, in order to do that, I've given you a few things that you can use to help prep for these conversations. Obviously, you don't have a whole lot of prep time if you're like in the car driving home from school and your kid's like, hey, I heard about this on the playground. But if you are opening up the conversation, you have some things that you can consider. So the day that the Capitol raid happened, I had not formed my own thoughts yet. I hadn't even formed my own opinions yet. I was still looking at all of it unfolding on the TV, but I was able to start thinking about these three things. Okay. When things get dark and things get scary and something on the news happens, I want you to think about these three things. All right. Number one, I want you to think what really happened and how much of that does my kid really need to know? Remember, we talked about leaving the gory details out of it. How much of it actually applies to them? How much is important that they know? How much is important for them to grasp and understand what's really going on without overwhelming them? Okay, so how much do they need to know? The second one, how does that affect them? Okay. Remember I talked about earlier, I live in Nashville, Tennessee. So if we're talking about the Capitol raid and they are worried that those same people are going to come into our house and get them, I can show them. You know what? That doesn't really apply to us because we live so, so far away from that. Those people aren't going to come here for you. Okay? So, number one, what really happened and how much of it does my kid need to know? Number two, how does this information or this event affect me and my family? And number three, here's the most important one. What do I want my kids to learn from all of this? And that's the trickiest one, right? Because some of that is really, really hard to know. For me specifically, I wanted kids that I work with to know that, you know what? That doesn't mean that these people are evil. That just means that they got really upset. They might have gotten really frustrated about something that they really believed in, and they made some bad decisions that day. And so what can we do to start making some good decisions? You know, what can we do to help them? What could we have done? Or if you get really passionate about something that you really believe in, was this the right choice? You know, what's a better choice that they could have made to draw attention to what they wanted to draw attention to without putting people in danger? And so we had a conversation around that. But there might be something else that you want your kid to take away from it. There might be, if you're talking about the pandemic, that reason and what you want them to learn from that is going to be completely different than if you're talking about the Capitol raid. Okay. So every time something comes onto the news and something else is new that you're going to have to talk to your kids about, you can go back to these three questions. All right. What happened and how much does my kid need to know about it? Number two, how does that affect me and my kids and my family? And number three, what do I want my kids to learn from it? Guys, if you can answer those 3 questions, it's going to be so much easier for you to have this conversation because you know where the conversation is headed. All right? I know that's a lot of information, and I know that I said so many things, so many little bitty nuggets in there that you could take away from this, but I so hope that that was helpful, just in giving you guys some direction on what you need to be saying to your kids, how much is acceptable, how much is not acceptable, and just kind of the nature of that conversation. All right. I hesitate to give anyone a standardized script ever because every kid is different. So if you think some of this will not apply to your kid, you are more than welcome to leave it out. All right. You don't have to have all of that stuff in there if you think your kid doesn't need it or you think your kid needs it, but he needs it a little bit differently. That's okay too. Guys, no one knows your kids better than you do. So I hope you were able to get some information so that you could apply to this to your own conversations with your kids. And I just hope that everything goes really well for you guys. Okay. I just want you to know, like, yes, we were so excited when 2020 was over because 2020 had so much of this stuff going on in it. But guess what? We woke up, and within the first few days of 2021, the Capitol raid happened. So there is always going to be something. There's always going to be something on the news. There's always going to be something else to discuss with your kids. So I hope that this was helpful to you. All right, guys. I hope you have a great day. If you're done and you're ready to log off, that's totally fine. But I did have a couple of questions come through on Instagram and on YouTube while I was going through those. So I'm just going to take a moment to address those. Um, One person asked, how much should I really be telling my kids? Like, how much is too overwhelming for them? That's a really, really, really hard to one to answer because all kids are different. Some kids are going to be able to handle a little bit more than other kids. Um, and so I would kind of ask you just to kind of read the room. If you start giving them information and they start to look like they are really becoming overwhelmed, you can back off a little bit. You can start to say, hey, I'm noticing you're starting to get a little anxious or you're starting to get a little scared. And I don't want that because this is nothing that you should be anxious or scared about. So, how about we take a moment away and then we come back and we talk about it a little bit more later? Okay, you can always do something like that. The other thing, notice I kept my opinions on how I felt about the Capitol raid completely out of it. Okay, that's another thing that I probably really should have touched on earlier. Um, too much would be adding too much of your own opinions into it, right? You don't want to color the lesson that you want your kids to get out of it with how you feel about it. Okay. So when talking with your kids, please try to leave your actual opinions out of it as much as possible. It is not going to be comforting to them if they see you get all razzed up. Okay, so save those for your mom or your spouse or somebody else, because your kids don't really need to be bearing the weight of those emotions. All right. Oh my goodness, our next question. Literally, somebody commented and was like, I really struggle to keep my heated and vocal opinion out of my responses with kids. Help. Oh my gosh, guys, I totally understand that. I really, really do. Um, Trust me, I have plenty of opinions about everything. And if you know me personally, you absolutely know that that's true. But it's not helpful. It's not helpful to your kids. And so hopefully that's enough for you to know. Um, Again, I would just encourage you to go back to those 3 questions. You know, how much does my kid really need to know about this? Your opinions probably aren't part of that. And then the second thing, how does it really apply to them? And what do I want my kids to learn from it? That one's going to really help you keep your opinions out of it. Because honestly, guys, I'm just going to be honest with you. We don't want to be working to teach our kids to think like us. We want to encourage our kids to think like them. Okay. We want them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. We want them to be able to explain why they think the things that they do. And I can guarantee you, if they get into a high school debate class and they said, well, I think this because my mommy said so, like that is not going to be an acceptable answer. Okay. So by having these conversations and keeping our opinions out of it, we can start encouraging them to start considering some things that maybe they wouldn't have considered otherwise. And we can also kind of help them to start using their own critical thinking skills and thinking about how they think about the event, not how we think about the event. All right. So hopefully that's helpful. Let's see the next one here. Um, I know it's important not to lie to my kids, but I really feel or fear overwhelming them. Um, Totally get you. Totally get you. It's really, really hard, isn't it? Because you can see the fear on their face. You can see how confused they are about it. And that is just so hard. I mean, you just want to take it all away. You just want to take it off of their shoulders completely. But in all honesty, if we do that, we're not doing them any favors, right? If we try to shield them from everything that's happening, that's just telling them, you know what, you don't really need to know about that. We're kind of fueling their naivety about it. We definitely want to tell them what's going on. They have a right to know what's going on in the world that they live in. Um, so it might be a little bit overwhelming, but you can always add a little extra to that comforting piece, right? Get out the map, say, look how far away we are from this event. They're not going to come for you. Look for the helpers. Try to really, really hone in that there are always more people doing the right thing than there are people doing the wrong thing. I always like to tell kids, you know, the news is always going to report the bad stuff. Very rarely do we see um, any newscast like giving live footage of a 5-year-old having breakfast before their virtual learning, right? Like the news reports things because it's rare and because it's exciting and overwhelming. You're never going to see the normal things on the news. So maybe that could be a piece of comfort for them to be able to say, like, the news brought this up because it's so rare. And the odds of it ever happening again are very, very slim. And the odds of it ever happening to you are slim. I just wanted you to be aware of it. And you can kind of leave it at that. And hopefully that helps a little bit. Let's see if we have another one. Um, what the heck are we supposed to say when we don't have their answers? You can tell them, I don't know. I mean, that's absolutely acceptable, right? If you tell them, hey, I don't know. I don't know why that happened. I don't know why those people chose it. Again, you can tell them to use their own critical thinking skills and say, why do you think that happened? or you can take the comforting route and go back to that circle of control and say, I don't know why that happened. Sometimes I'm not really able to understand why people do the things that they do. But you know what we can do? We can focus on the things that we can control, and we can focus on the things that we want to learn from this and we want to be better about. So you can just tell them, I don't know. That's totally okay. One says, I struggle with all of this so much. Half the time, I feel like I'm just as clueless as my kids are, and I am in no place to answer their questions. That's normal. That's so normal. I don't know. I feel like anybody who works with kids or has kids kind of just feels like they're in a constant state of like mild drowning. There are some really high peaks for sure, but when we have to have these really hard conversations, it's so hard. So I completely understand, when we don't have all the answers and we don't even know how we feel about it. It's okay, if you say, "Hey, I'm not really ready to have this conversation. Can I think about it and come back to you?" I was watching this all unfold on my TV, and I had not gotten my thoughts formulated. And thankfully, I didn't have any little feet running around my house as I was watching, asking me, "Well, what's going on, mommy? How do you feel about that, mommy?" I didn't have that, and maybe you did. And so, guys, it's completely okay to say, hey, mommy's watching this right now so that she can get all the information. And after I get all the information, I'm going to really think about how I feel about it, and then I'll come and talk to you about it. Okay. That lets them know that like their questions aren't being ignored. But it also gives you a chance to kind of get it together a little bit before you have that conversation. All right. It gives you a moment to step away and kind of reflect on those prep questions, before you just kind of launch into having that conversation with your kids. Because, guys, if you start talking and you don't have at least a mild direction of where you're headed, it's going to be so confusing for them, and it's going to be so confusing for you. So it's completely okay if they, say, "Hey, what's this about? What's going on?" And you say, I don't know. Give me just a second, and I'll come back and I'll get that answer for you. Okay, so that's always okay to do too. Ooh, oh, I know this person. Let's see. I work with them. She says, I am a teacher and I don't know how much is my place to tell kids and how much they should ask their parents. Wow. That is a tricky one. Okay. So I'm a teacher as well. I teach kindergarten in Nashville, if you didn't know that. And I feel this every single day, right? It is our job to teach, and it's not our job to give opinions. And that's kind of where I have been at it the whole time. You know, we are in a really hard place as teachers because we don't want to say anything that is opposite of how their parents want to address it. So you need to be really mindful of that. You don't want to come in with your thoughts and ideas too fast. But you also want to acknowledge the fact that some parents don't want to have this conversation with their kids, and they're relying on you as their teacher to have that conversation with them because they don't want to do it or they don't know how to do it. So again, I would just kind of say, we're going to leave opinions out of this, but again, here's what happened. Here's what you need to know about it. Here's how it affects you, and here's what we can learn from it. That's kind of what I stick to in the classroom so that I'm not saying anything. There's not a chance that I'm saying anything that a parent would be really, really upset that I said, right? So definitely, if nothing else, leave your opinions on how you think it's going and that kind of a thing out of it. Um, there's one more. It says, personally, I don't feel very optimistic or comforted by anything that's in the news right now. How much can my kids sense my own uncertainty and anxiety? Okay. I do not want to scare you at all because obviously this is super important and I don't want you to not have this conversation because you're worried about doing it wrong. But your kids really can pick up on more anxiety than you think they can. Okay, if you are frustrated about something, I guarantee you they know it. Even if you're a really good actress, If you are anxious about something, if you are worried about something, if you are angry about something, I bet you they know it. Okay. So it's really important when we do have these conversations, it's important that we let them know how we're feeling. You know, this is kind of a scary, and worrisome thing for me too. And it's okay to let them know that, but you also need to say, you know, this isn't something that really either of us need to be worried about to the extent that we're worrying about it, right? Like, I'm worried about this, and I completely understand why you're worried about this, but this is so far out of our control that we need to take a step back and we need to focus on what we can really do and what we can really learn from this, so that we can have a better idea of what we need to do moving forward. Okay. And if it's at all possible, please stay calm, okay? If you can keep yourself from crying, please do. If you can keep yourself from yelling about your own opinions about it, please do. Um, Again, we want to make this as much of a normal conversation as we can. We want them to feel the same level of comfort talking to us about a capital raid as they feel talking about what they're going to have for dinner at night. And if you bring all of your overwhelming emotions to the conversation, they aren't going to feel that level of comfort that they need in that conversation. Okay, so what I like to do is get all my worry and all my fear and all my sadness, and I like to bottle it up and I like to go take a shower. And I have my own little time in there where no one disturbs me, and I to say, "Hey, I'm gonna cry my eyes out in here, and I'm gonna whisper, yell all of the things that I wish I could scream at people, and I'm gonna take care of that emotion so that I can go back out and I can be calm and I can have a collected, productive conversation with my kids." I do that with my fiance too, by the way. So that is not just for kids. Like, if you have too much emotion and it is stopping you from having a productive conversation, take a second. Say, "Hey, I need to take a break and I need to go get myself under control and I'm going to come back so that I can be really good for this conversation." Okay? That's always more than okay to do. And it's really a good thing to model for your kids as well. All right. Are there any more questions? I don't think I see any more. Okay. If you do, you are more than welcome to contact me in several ways. I would love, love, love for you excuse me, to hit me up with anything that you have. Let me know how your conversations go. You can send me a direct message on Instagram. You can send it to me on Facebook, or you can email me. It's just Bethany@crayonstoconfidence.com. Guys, I hope this was really helpful for you, and I hope that as everything kind of proceeds to go the direction it's going, with inauguration and all of that kind of stuff, and as we proceed through 2021, I hope you find it at least a little bit easier, or you feel like maybe you have a little bit more guidance in talking to your kids. All right. I hope you guys have a great day. I will see you next time.